Take a look at this satellite image from China. At first glance, it shows nothing but an empty, arid, desert landscape, but right in the middle there's something unusual, some kind of structure. As we zoom in, we can see it looks just like an aircraft carrier, the kind used by militaries around the world as floating air bases, complete with runways, fighter jets, and weapons. But this one isn't in the ocean, it's in the middle of the desert. Let's zoom out for some context. The satellite image was taken over the Taklamakan Desert in northwestern China. Normally, aircraft carriers operate in the harsh conditions of the open sea, but this region, while far more dry, is no less extreme. From a global perspective, the Taklamakan Desert is a fascinating place. Unlike the surrounding deserts made of rock, this one is made of sand. In fact, it is the second largest sand desert in the world. Vast, uninhabited, and seemingly untouched by humans, it stretches out like a giant eye made of sand, a landscape so alien, it almost looks like it belongs to another planet. So why, of all places, would the Chinese military build these structures here? In recent years, China has made increasing headlines for its expanding aircraft carrier project. China's first domestically built aircraft carrier has entered service. China has clearly invested in this defense industrial infrastructure to produce these ships. Just 15 years ago, China didn't have a single aircraft carrier. Today it has 3. But if we take a closer look at the shape in the satellite image, something doesn't add up. The design doesn't match that of China's own carriers. Instead, the structure strongly resembles the design of the American ones. For comparison, here is the distinctive shape of the Gerald-up Ford-class carrier, the latest in the U.S. Navy's fleet. Moving slightly away from this location, we can see a path cutting through the desert. This appears to be train tracks, and on the other side of the tracks, yet another structure comes into view. This one doesn't look like an aircraft carrier, but it has a striking resemblance to an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, one of the most widely used warships in the U.S. Navy. The similarity is unmistakable, not just because of its general shape, but because of the precise outlines of key features like the ship's bridge, its funnels, and even the vertical launch system used for firing missiles. But it also doesn't look quite like the real ship. It looks more like a flat mock-up, a replica built to mimic the real thing. Examining historical satellite images confirms this suspicion. We can see that in 2020, the site first appeared as a grid of cubes with several tall structures, possibly masts or antennas, arranged in the shape of the American warship. Only later was the full outline of the ship marked more clearly. The aircraft carrier shape also appears to be just a mock-up. Here, older satellite images show that this spot originally had a different layout, featuring 3 distinct shapes, a small and a medium-sized outline of an aircraft carrier, and the largest version drawn with those tall metal poles. And when we look again at the train tracks running through the middle, we can see just how strange they are. Instead of running straight, the track curves and twists before making a sharp right turn. This is odd because the surrounding desert is completely flat land, so there are absolutely no natural obstacles that would require these turns. Why wasn't the track built in a straight line? And it gets even stranger when we follow where these tracks lead. Heading north, they come to a stop at a base facility with a large hangar, a few supporting buildings, and a lot of trucks nearby. And when following the tracks the other way, heading south, they simply vanish into the desert as the tracks just end, with no sign of ongoing construction and no clear purpose. To get close to understanding why China is doing all of this, it's helpful to take a look at where the real counterparts of these mock-up ships are located, because it turns out U.S. aircraft carriers often aren't as far away from this desert as one might think. The United States has deployed an aircraft carrier to the South China Sea. A Chinese warship almost running into an American destroyer on Saturday. Tensions in the waters around China have been escalating for years, leading to frequent confrontation between the U.S. and China. At the center of these disputes are 2 major conflicts, the South China Sea and Taiwan. In the South China Sea, multiple nations lay claim to various overlapping territories, and China asserts its claim over almost the entire sea, treating the ocean as its own national territory rather than international waters. To reinforce this claim, China has artificially expanded low-lying islands and underwater reefs, covering them with sand and transforming them into military outposts. The U.S., in response, regularly sends warships through these waters and conducts military exercises. The purpose of these so-called freedom of navigation operations is to challenge China's territorial claims on the sea. But this is just one reason why US carriers are present near China. The second major conflict is the increasingly tense situation between China and Taiwan. Tensions over Taiwan look no closer to a peaceful resolution. Beijing claims Taiwan as part of its territory. While Taiwan de facto operates as a fully independent nation with its own government, mainland China views it as a renegade province, one that, if necessary, could be brought under control by force. The threat of a Chinese invasion of Taiwan is very real, and it is something the US opposes, which is why the US Navy maintains a strong presence in the Taiwan Strait. These are two serious conflicts that have the potential to become much worse, and China is preparing for them by using their desert as a practice ground for a potential future war. The structures are practice targets built to test whether Chinese missiles can accurately strike US warships. Some experts believe that the many vertical metal poles could be sensors used to study the impact of missile strikes on these targets. Another theory is that they are radar reflectors, placed to better simulate the complex metal structure of an actual vessel so that radar-guided attacks can be tested. And satellite images from a different test site confirm China is hitting their targets. But striking a stationary target is one thing. A real warship, of course, wouldn't just sit still, and that is where the train tracks come into play. When following the exact path of the tracks, we find yet another aircraft carrier mock-up, this one perhaps the most elaborate of them all. A three-dimensional model complete with numerous poles sticking up from its structure. A photograph taken at a Chinese arms convention appears to show a scale model of this very system. And according to these photos, the mock-up was developed by the Chinese arms manufacturer, CASIC. Experts believe that the curves in the track are designed so China can simulate a United States carrier taking evasive maneuvers to avoid being hit. They can simulate a carrier taking two sharp turns to avoid being tracked by a missile or speeding off to get out of the possible impact zone. And once again, satellite imagery suggests that these tests have been successful. Now, China isn't the only country building mock-ups of American warships. In 2014, Iran constructed a replica of a US aircraft carrier, this one even seaworthy. They used it for missile tests and then repeatedly bombed it until it sank, an exercise that gained international media attention. Even though propaganda may have played a larger role than actual practice in this specific case, training with mock-up targets is a common military practice. And the US is doing this all the time, building elaborate fake towns in their own deserts and even training with their own mock-ups. For instance, a replica of China's Chengdu J-20 fighter jet was spotted at a US Air Force base in Georgia, and it's well documented that the US military has operated fully functional Russian Su-27 and MiG-29 fighter jets on American soil for training purposes. But what makes these mock-ups particularly concerning for the US is that China isn't testing ordinary weapons. China is using these tests to demonstrate a system that could fundamentally change military strategy in both conflicts mentioned before. US intelligence assumes that China possesses a specialized variant of its Dongfeng 21D missile that is specifically designed to target and destroy moving warships like aircraft carriers. This Chinese missile follows a ballistic trajectory, launching high into the atmosphere before plummeting back down at extreme speeds. Then, during the descent phase, a maneuverable reentry vehicle separates from the missile. And unlike a traditional ballistic warhead, this one can adjust its course in midair, allowing it to strike smaller, more precise targets and even track and hit moving ships. To support this system, China has also expanded its satellite network, improving its ability to track moving targets in real time. Experts believe that defending against this kind of weapon is extremely difficult. Unlike short-range missiles or torpedoes, which require a submarine to get dangerously close to an aircraft carrier, this system enables China to attack US ships from medium range in mainland China. This means conventional US surface-to-air defense systems may not be able to react quickly enough to intercept the missile during the mid-flight phase. And in the final phase, interception becomes even more difficult due to the maneuverable reentry vehicle, which follows an unpredictable flight path and could potentially execute evasive maneuvers. Conducting these tests in the middle of the desert, fully visible to satellites, could be seen as an intentional message, as it is to the benefit of China if these capabilities are known. That is, because the mere existence of this technology is already shifting the balance of power. If the US cannot bring their carriers within striking distance of missile, they are forced to operate them farther away from China, which would put the conflict zones outside the range of the aircraft stationed on the carrier, practically negating the use of such carriers. And so, without ever needing to use the weapon, its presence is strengthening China's ability to project power in these conflict zones. Taiwan is also preparing for this possibility, and the country has recently announced a large-scale military drill, simulating a Chinese invasion of the island, with over 22,000 reservists taking part. So far, this story hasn't been picked up by many major US news outlets, but it's an important development to follow. And to help myself keep track of stories like this, I love using this video sponsor, Ground News. The idea behind Ground News is simple, but it completely changed how I stay on top of global events. Ground News doesn't write its own articles. Instead, it collects coverage from a wide range of sources and organizes them by story. At the top of each story, you get a quick summary of what's going on. You can instantly see how coverage differs between left and right-leaning sources. In this case, Ground News shows that the Taiwan story has been covered by 23 sources, 36% left, 43% center, and 21% right. Bloomberg, a left-leaning outlet, frames the drills as President Lai choosing to confront China, implying Taiwan is provoking tension. On the right, the Epoch Times emphasizes the threat from the CCP, portraying Taiwan's actions as defensive. With Ground News, you can instantly spot these kinds of framing differences and get a more complete perspective on what's really happening. In fact, Ground News has a whole page dedicated to tracking stories with the biggest coverage gap, and it lets you track your own reading habits over time so you can see which outlets and topics you gravitate toward, a great way to see where your own blind spots might be. So head to ground.news or click the button on screen right now to try Ground News today. And if you use that exact link, you'll even get 40% off their Vantage plan, which is their most elaborate plan, and you'll be supporting my channel at the same time.